He shoved the black man into the defendant's chair and smirked. No lawyer. Then no voice, the judge sneered to the room, but the man didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just sat there, calm, like he'd seen this collapse coming for years. What they didn't know? He's the director of the FBI, and this courtroom was already surrounded. If that made your heart race, don't scroll. This isn't fiction. It's how silence brings justice crashing through doors. Tap like if you believe dignity needs no defense. Now come with me. It was late in the day, and the golden light that filtered through the courthouse windows did little to warm the chill inside. The courtroom was already full by the time the doors opened again. Locals had come not for justice, but for confirmation. In Millstone, they didn't watch trials to discover the truth. They watched to see that the story stayed exactly as they were told it should. When the officers brought him in, he didn't look like what they expected. No slumped shoulders, no signs of confusion. Just a man in a gray suit, a little rumpled from the holding cell, but clean pressed enough to suggest he'd dressed himself that morning with care. His hands were free now, but the red indentations around his wrists had not yet faded. There was no lawyer walking beside him. The chair where counsel should have been sat empty, quietly accusing the system that had made it so. And yet he did not look unsettled. He walked straight with the kind of stillness that made the room quieter than it meant to be. Garrison and Finley sat in the front row of the gallery, uniform relaxed and far too entertained. Garrison had one ankle propped over his knee, chewing something slowly as he stared at the man being seated. Finley leaned in, murmured something that made them both chuckle. The kind of laugh that didn't require a punchline. The kind that came when a man believed the ending was already written in his favor. He took his seat at the defense table with deliberate calm. A single glass of water waited for him untouched. Around him, the sound of murmurs began to rise. People whispering things they thought wouldn't be heard. Some called him a protester, some a troublemaker. One man called him arrogant, just loud enough for it to stick in the air. He didn't look at any of them, not even the judge's bench still empty. His gaze wandered calmly across the courtroom, not challenging but not yielding either. It was the kind of look that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. The court clerk stood and read the charges. Obstruction, refusal to comply, disorderly conduct during a traffic stop. There were no weapons, no drugs, no threats. Just a man who had apparently stood still too long when they told him to move and asked too many questions when they told him to be quiet. From the gallery, Garrison shifted forward and leaned on the back of the bench in front of him. He said it like a joke, but loud enough for everyone to hear. He thinks that suit's gonna save him. The man in the gray suit turned his head slightly. He didn't look at Garrison. He looked through him. Then, without raising his voice, he spoke. I didn't fight, he said. I just didn't kneel. The words landed like a dropped stone in still water. No shouting, no fist raised, just 7 words. But they turned the air. Somewhere near the back, a woman coughed. Others shifted in their seats, uncertain whether what they just heard was defiance or dignity. It had been so long since they'd seen the difference, most no longer remembered how to tell. An older woman near the center of the gallery, her hair neatly pulled back and her scarf folded with care, leaned slightly forward. Her name was Odessa, and she'd lived in Millstone long enough to remember the names no one said out loud anymore. She narrowed her eyes not with judgment, but with curiosity. It was rare in this town to see a man walk in alone and not be swallowed whole. Just ahead of her, a young boy sat beside his grandmother. He had been fidgeting with a piece of paper in his lap, folding and unfolding the edge without purpose. He looked up, puzzled. Why isn't he scared? He asked softly. His grandmother kept her eyes on the man in the gray suit. She didn't answer right away. She studied him with the quiet attention of someone watching not just a person, but a moment. Then she leaned in and replied with a voice so soft the boy almost missed it. Because he's not supposed to be here. The boy blinked. He didn't understand what she meant. Not yet, but the silence that followed made him put the paper down. Back at the defense table, Malcolm Drexler, though no one had spoken his name aloud, sat with his hands folded neatly. He didn't look at the judge's chair still unoccupied. He didn't look at the jury box already half decided. He just looked ahead. And though no verdict had been read and no ruling given, it already felt like something had shifted. He hadn't come to shout. But the room had heard him anyway. The judge had arrived, and her presence settled the room in like the closing of a heavy book. Judge Claremont, stern-faced and exact, called the proceedings to order without ceremony. She glanced briefly at the file before her, then lifted her gaze to the prosecutor, giving a slight nod. Lorna Creed stood her heels clicking with confidence as she approached the screen. Her tone was clipped precise. "This is the body cam footage from the incident," she said, holding up a remote. "Captured at 5:04 p.m. Jefferson Avenue." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the screen blinked to life. A faint mechanical hum filled the room, the kind that always came with old projectors and systems not quite designed for justice. The footage rolled. The view was from a chest-level angle, slightly tilted. An officer walked up to a car parked at the curb. The man standing outside it, Malcolm, had his hands visible at his sides. His voice could be heard, calm and low. "What's the reason for the stop?" Another voice answered, louder, more clipped. "Step back from the vehicle." Malcolm remained still. No movement. No threat. The next command came quicker, more forceful. Then there was a sudden grab, the body cam jerking violently as the footage cut out. It lasted maybe 20 seconds. A low wave of shifting chairs and murmurs followed. Someone in the gallery nodded to himself. Someone else whispered, "That's all they need." Lorna stepped away from the screen, folding her hands as the room brightened again. "You've seen it for yourselves," she said. The defendant refused a lawful order, and his behavior escalated the situation. Malcolm stood quietly, then spoke. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried. "The moment you clipped this video," he said, "you clipped the truth with it." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. No response. Lorna gave a half smile, brushing at the cuff of her sleeve. "Obstruction isn't about volume," she said. "It's about behavior." Malcolm looked toward the gallery, not at the officers, not at the judge. "You showed 20 seconds, he said calmly, "but that stop lasted nearly 5 minutes. Where's the rest? Where's the part where I asked why I was pulled over? Where's the part where I said nothing and was still called a threat?" Garrison, seated just behind the prosecutor's table, leaned into Finley and muttered under his breath. "He's just dressing up what happened," he said. Fancy words to cover simple truth. But a different voice cut through the low whisper. "Odessa." She didn't raise her hand. She didn't wait to be recognized. She just spoke, and somehow the sound carried further than it should have. "That's not twisting," she said. "That's unlearning what they've always told us." A few heads turned toward her. The judge paused but said nothing. Malcolm didn't respond to the interruption. He stood steady, facing forward. "You don't have to raise your voice to speak the truth," he said. "Sometimes it's the quietest person in the room who remembers how the story really went." He returned to his seat. The room had changed. It wasn't loud, no one applauded, but something subtle had shifted. A man near the back leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered, "They didn't show what mattered." She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the man in gray. The screen was off now, but the scene continued to play in people's minds. And in that silence, for the first time since the trial began, people weren't just watching. They were listening. For a moment after he sat down, the room held still with him. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the low shuffling and whispers that had filled the space before had faded into something close to reverence. Or maybe it was uncertainty. Whatever it was, it didn't belong to the court anymore. It belonged to him. Malcolm Drexler sat quietly at the defense table, hands folded, shoulders relaxed. There was no tension in his posture. No anger pressed into the lines of his face, just stillness. And that stillness made people uncomfortable. Not because it was threatening, but because it was steady, because it did not apologize, because it made them ask, what kind of man sits so still when everything around him is meant to break him? Judge Claremont cleared her throat a little sharper than necessary. "Mr. Drexler," she said, her voice clipped, "you will keep your responses within the scope of the charges. This is not a platform for speeches." He turned his head slightly, but did not look directly at her. "Everything I've said," he replied, "is within the scope of what brought me here. Whether or not you choose to listen to it is another matter." There was no defiance in his tone, only clarity. That somehow made it harder to dismiss. The judge stared at him for a long second, then looked away without responding. She shifted some papers that didn't need shifting and adjusted her glasses even though they sat perfectly in place. The silence that followed felt heavier now. Not dead, just waiting. Across the room, Garrison fidgeted in his seat. His knee bounced once, then twice, and then he stood abruptly. His voice cracked through the stillness like a slammed door. "He's manipulating the room," he snapped. "That's what this is. All this calm, all this silence. He's playing innocent, twisting the whole mood, and you're letting him do it." He didn't look at the judge when he said it. He looked at Malcolm, as if trying to provoke something. Malcolm turned to him slowly. His eyes were calm, his words softer than the outburst deserved. "No," he said, I'm letting you expose it. Garrison opened his mouth as if to reply, but then closed it again. His jaw clenched. He sat down, but not easily. Somewhere in the back, a woman stood. It was sudden quiet. She looked like someone who didn't expect to speak that day. Her dress was simple, her hands nervous. She held herself upright like someone who was afraid, but had decided to do it anyway. I was there, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I saw what happened. The gallery shifted. A few heads turned. The judge looked up sharply. Before the woman could say more, a deputy stepped toward her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Ma'am, please sit down, he said, calm but firm. She looked at Malcolm. Their eyes met, and for a moment it felt like something passed between them. He didn't nod, he didn't encourage, but he didn't need to. She sat, not because she was intimidated, not because she gave up, but because she understood something deeper. That sometimes silence was not retreat. Sometimes silence was the only way to protect the truth until it was ready to be heard. The judge tried to regain order. She straightened the folder on her desk again and addressed the courtroom. This is not the time for witnesses not called by counsel. The court will maintain order moving forward. But the court in that moment belonged to no one on the bench. It belonged to the man who hadn't raised his voice once, and yet had made the room feel like it had heard more than it had in years. The prosecutor shuffled her notes. Garrison stared ahead, jaw tight. And in the middle of the silence, someone in the gallery whispered quietly to no one in particular. He hasn't even raised his voice. And he hadn't. But somehow everything was already beginning to sound different. It began with something small. A pause. A hesitation. The kind that most people wouldn't have noticed unless they had been in courtrooms long enough to know what silence is supposed to sound like. The clerk leaned toward her screen again. She squinted. Her fingers hovered just above the keyboard, then dropped again, typing slowly. She waited. Nothing changed. Then she looked up. Your Honor, she said carefully, her voice quiet but firm. I'm not finding a match. Judge Claremont blinked. Once. Then sat forward. What kind of match? She asked. The clerk glanced back at her screen. His full legal name returns no state-level record, no license, no residential data, no previous court files. A low murmur rippled through the benches. A few people turned to one another with puzzled faces. Others leaned forward slightly, their eyes narrowing. Try the federal level, Claremont said briskly. The clerk was already doing so. She waited, tapping the enter key again. Then she shook her head almost reluctantly. Nothing, not even sealed files. It's like... She trailed off. The judge interrupted her. It's a system error, probably a sync failure. We've had glitches before. But the clerk didn't look convinced, and neither did anyone else who had been paying attention. From the back row, a man lifted his head. He hadn't moved much until now. He had been sitting quietly through the earlier testimony, his notepad balanced across one knee, pen steady in his hand. He wore a simple charcoal suit and a quiet presence, the kind of man who could disappear in a room simply by choosing to observe. His name was Isaac Holloway. He didn't speak. He just continued to write. But something about the way he paused between words now, the way his eyes rested a moment longer on the clerk's screen, caught the attention of one of the reporters seated nearby. Across the aisle, the camera operator for the local station turned to the woman beside him and gave a slight nod. Without a word, she adjusted the angle of her phone, focusing now not on the judge, not on the clerk, but on Malcolm Drexler. There was something in the way he sat. He hadn't reacted, not when they said his name didn't show up, not when the room shifted with confusion. He sat the same way he had from the beginning. Hands folded, eyes steady, posture relaxed. The live stream comment feed began to scroll faster. Wait, no records. Who is this guy? That man's not normal. I swear I've seen him before. DC, some military thing. Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor adjusted her glasses and turned toward the defense table. Mr. Drexler, she said, could you confirm your full legal name for the record? Malcolm nodded once, then spoke. Malcolm Isaiah Drexler. Middle name, too, the clerk confirmed, typing again. Still nothing. Claremont looked impatient now. She tapped her gavel lightly, but did not strike. This is not a mystery drama, she said. We've had database delays before. The court will proceed as scheduled. But even her voice had changed. Slightly thinner now, less certain. Odessa, seated in the third row, leaned toward the woman beside her and whispered quietly, something's not right. The woman nodded without looking away. And still Malcolm said nothing more. He didn't explain the missing records. He didn't offer a story. He let the silence do what it was meant to do. It made people wonder, And in a courtroom that had started the day so sure of who he was, that wonder began to feel like the first crack in something that had long seemed unshakable. It happened the way these things often do now, not through shouting, not through evidence passed over the bench, but through a screen. Somewhere outside that courtroom, a viewer watching the live stream on a cracked phone in a quiet apartment saw a face they remembered. Not from a mugshot or a local report, from somewhere higher, somewhere harder to forget. The photo came in quietly at first, a blurry screenshot from a national security conference the year before. A man in a gray suit standing behind the podium. He was not speaking, he was not on the schedule, but he was there, standing beside the president, not smiling, not waving, just watching. Within minutes, the image had been cropped, enlarged, reposted, and circulated in comment threads faster than the courtroom could breathe. Some said it was fake. Others were certain it was real. But by the time it reached the camera crew inside the courtroom, the whisper was already moving faster than the live stream could keep up. In the gallery, one of the reporters leaned toward his cameraman and murmured, barely moving his lips, "Zoom in, get his face." The cameraman didn't argue. He adjusted his angle, steadied his frame, and pressed record again. Finley, seated just behind the prosecutor's table, leaned toward Garrison. He had gone pale. "You see that?" he asked under his breath. "That photo, that looks like him." Garrison didn't answer immediately. His hands were clenched against his thighs, jaw tight, eyes locked on Malcolm. His voice, when it came, was lower than usual. "I don't know," he said. "Could be a look-alike." But he didn't sound convinced. The judge had noticed the shift in the room. She tapped her gavel once more out of habit than authority. "What is this?" she snapped. "Why are people whispering?" The prosecutor rose halfway to her feet, unsure whether to speak or not. She looked back at the screen on the reporter's tablet, but it was too late. The image had already done its work. Someone in the gallery stood up, phone in hand. "Your Honor, I think people outside this room know who he is." The judge's eyes flared. Her voice rose for the first time. "This trial is not a game of identity," she barked. "This court will not be derailed by rumors, images, or internet distractions. Sit down or be removed." The man sat, slowly, but his phone remained in his lap screen, still glowing. All eyes turned to Malcolm. He had not moved. Not once since the first mention of the photo. He hadn't blinked more than anyone else. His shoulders stayed relaxed. His hands still rested calmly in front of him. If the image was real, he didn't show it. If it was false, he didn't bother to deny it. Judge Claremont leaned forward. "Mr. Drexler," she said sharply, "do you intend to address these claims?" He turned toward her, slowly, without haste. His voice was as even as it had been from the beginning. "What scares you more?" he asked. He paused, letting the room hold its breath again. "That I might be no one," he said, "or someone." He didn't say another word. He didn't have to. And for the first time, even those who had wanted to dismiss him began to wonder if they'd made a mistake in assuming silence meant insignificance. The image of him standing beside the president had faded from the screen, but not from the room. It lingered like dust in the air, silent and unshakable. People shifted in their seats without knowing why. Their posture straightened. Their breath slowed. Something had changed, though no one could yet put words to it. Malcolm stood. There was no drama in it, no tension, just the quiet assertion of someone who knew what he carried. He let the moment settle before speaking. "Your Honor," he said, with the same calm he had used since the start, "as I have not been appointed counsel, I'd like permission to represent myself for the remainder of this hearing." Claremont hesitated. Her eyes were sharp, but something behind them flickered now. "You may proceed," she said. Briefly. He didn't step forward. He didn't perform. He simply opened the folder that had been beside him all morning and placed it gently on the table. "I would like to read a few names into the record." There was a pause as he lifted the first sheet. Terrence Holloway, 17, stopped while biking home from school. Complaint filed after injuries sustained during detainment. Case dismissed. He turned the page slowly. Camille Rhodes, 32, pushed to the ground during a wellness check. Report concluded she was uncooperative. Another turn. Marcus Jennings, 61, Vietnam veteran, cited for obstruction after refusing to leave his porch. Filed for damages. Case denied without hearing. His voice never rose. He did not editorialize. He let the facts speak with their own weight. All of them, he said, lifting his gaze, were black. All of them trusted this system enough to report what happened. And every one of them was told their truth wasn't enough. There was a quiet shift in the room. It was not dramatic, but it was real. People who had come out of habit now leaned forward out of instinct. I didn't come here to prove I was innocent, Malcolm said. I came to see if your court was. The words hung in the air. No one moved. No one reached for a pen. Even Claremont, who had spent her career controlling rooms like this, paused before responding. In the back row, Isaac Holloway glanced at his watch. The hands moved slowly, but his eyes did not. He folded the small notebook he had been writing in and slipped it back into the inside pocket of his coat. His breath was measured, but his brow had begun to tighten. He had seen institutions crack before. He knew the weight of a moment like this. He had felt it in military briefings and classified interrogations. He felt it now. He had seen rooms fall apart faster than this, but never so quietly. Claremont finally found her voice again, sharp but unsteady. This is a court of law, not a theater. Enough with the commentary, no more monologues. Malcolm nodded. That's fine, he said. He reached back into the folder and placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of him. Because I brought evidence. Then he looked at her, not with aggression, not with pride, but with clarity. And a witness. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst might have been. He didn't gesture. He didn't name names. He didn't try to explain what would come next. He simply let the weight of what had been said settle into the space where pretense used to be. And for the first time since the hearing began, it was no longer clear who was being measured. Not him, not anymore. It was the court. It was everyone who had looked at him and seen only a name on a docket. It was the building in itself. The silence returned not as a pause, but as a presence. Thick, settled, as if the room itself was holding its breath. No one moved. Judge Claremont adjusted her glasses, then reached for the gavel with a hand that moved slower than usual. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been all morning. In the absence of verifiable identity and with no admissible counsel or confirmed witness, this court is prepared to render judgment. The gavel began to lift. Then Malcolm spoke, softly, as if continuing a thought rather than interrupting one. Call my witness. The words cut the air like a bell in a chapel, quiet but unmistakable. Claremont froze. Excuse me. Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He didn't repeat himself. He's in the room. For a beat, no one moved. Then from the back of the courtroom, a figure stood. Isaac Holloway closed the notebook in his lap, straightened his coat, and stepped into the aisle. His walk was unhurried, but it had the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need permission to be where he was going. As he passed Malcolm's table, their eyes met for a single moment. A glance, nothing more. But in that stillness, something passed between them. Not a signal, not a plan. Just a quiet exchange that told anyone watching this had been long prepared. Isaac reached the prosecution's table, placed a slim file gently on its surface, then turned to face the bench. His voice was low but calm, and it carried to every corner of the room. Your Honor, he said, my name is Isaac Holloway. He reached into his inner pocket and produced a leather badge case, unfolding it with deliberate ease. Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Internal Affairs Division. Gasps didn't come all at once. They came in slow waves, like the room needed a moment to believe its own ears. Isaac did not look at the audience. He looked only at the judge. I am here under directive authority, accompanied by federal documentation that will be submitted into the record as needed. Before Claremont could find her response, a voice erupted from the front row. Garrison. He stood so fast his chair scraped against the tile, pointing toward Malcolm, as if the act alone could shift the narrative. He tricked us, Garrison shouted. He manipulated this whole thing. This is a setup. His voice cracked with something beyond anger. Fear. Isaac didn't flinch. He didn't turn. This man, he said, is not the defendant. He is the sitting director of the FBI. Another pause, just long enough for it to sink in. And he came here to watch this courtroom fail, in person. There were no further outbursts, no shouts, just a stillness so absolute it felt louder than any protest. Claremont's mouth had opened slightly, but no words came. Her hand still holding the gavel had not lowered. Finley sat frozen beside Garrison, staring forward as if trying not to exist. In the gallery, Odessa leaned in slowly, not with shock, with something closer to recognition. She didn't nod, she didn't smile, but her eyes seemed to say she had suspected something the entire time, even if she hadn't let herself believe it. Malcolm Drexler remained seated. He had not moved since Isaac stood. He did not look triumphant. He did not smirk. He simply allowed the moment to land as it was meant to. Then, with the quiet grace that had defined him from the very first moment, he turned his head toward Isaac, toward the judge, toward the room, and nodded. It was not a victory. It was not a reveal. It was a confirmation of what had already been made clear. The man they had tried to judge had never truly been on trial. But now the court was. The courtroom had not moved since Isaac Holloway revealed his badge. But the silence now was different. It wasn't just shock. It was the breathless stillness of something long overdue. Something that had pressed at the walls of this room since the first moment Malcolm Drexler entered. Isaac placed a hand on the sealed folder in front of him, then lifted his gaze toward the bench. Judge Claremont's fingers remained on the gavel, her jaw set tight, but something in her posture had changed. "With your permission, Your Honor," Isaac said, his tone even but unshakable. "The Bureau would like to submit critical evidence that was altered, withheld, or ignored by key individuals involved in this case." Claremont's voice came slower than usual, her formality fraying slightly at the edges. "You may proceed," she said briefly. Isaac nodded and opened the folder. Inside were labeled drives, reports bearing the Bureau's seal, and a copy of Officer Garrison's original case file. He handed one drive to the technician. The lights dimmed, the screen came to life. This was no longer the version of events the courtroom had seen before. It began the same timestamp matching the previously shown footage. But now the missing frames appeared. Malcolm standing still beside his car, palms open, voice calm and respectful. The officer raising his tone unprovoked. The shove, then the strike. Malcolm never moved toward him, never raised a hand. His only resistance had been the refusal to kneel. Then came the parts that had been entirely cut, bystander voices. Yelling in protest, a woman calling from across the street. He didn't do anything. Another man shouting, "He's not fighting, he's bleeding." A slow motion replay of the blow to the head, blood bright against pavement. Garrison's voice, too loud now, shouting stop, resisting to a man who had never moved. The video ended. The lights rose. No one breathed. A woman near the back wiped tears with the edge of her sleeve. Odessa's hand gripped the bench in front of her. A man who had laughed earlier now looked down at the floor. Isaac turned slowly, no need to raise his voice. The original report was falsified. Footage was edited before submission. Use of force violations were concealed. Complaints dismissed, warnings ignored. He paused, then looked at Garrison. By design. Garrison stood slowly, his body stiff with fury. "This is garbage," he hissed. "That man staged all of this. He lied about who he was, about why he came here. This is manipulation. This is a trap." He pointed at Malcolm. His voice rose with desperation. "He planned this. This is all part of his game." He took a step forward, but two plainclothes agents moved at the same time, one from each side. They did not raise their voices. They did not pull weapons. They simply stepped forward, calm and precise. "Officer Thomas Garrison," one said, "you are hereby placed under federal custody for obstruction of justice, falsification of official documents, and misconduct under color of law." Garrison tried to protest. The agents didn't react. One reached for his wrist. The cuffs clicked once, sharp and final. No one in the courtroom cheered. They didn't need to. Justice didn't need applause. It needed to be seen. Judge Claremont cleared her throat, straightened, and tried to restore what had already unraveled. This court recognizes procedural failures in this case. However, these failures reflect administrative gaps, not willful neglect. A review board will address. Her words faltered. People weren't looking at her anymore. Claremont's eyes drifted down to the file in front of her, not to read, but to avoid every pair of eyes now searching her for the accountability she had never demanded from others. On the far side of the room, a reporter raised her phone, started filming. Another whispered instructions to a cameraman who silently panned across the gallery. Someone in the press row had already begun live streaming. The lens didn't look away. The story had started as a courtroom incident, but now it had become something else entirely. Malcolm remained seated. He had not moved, he had not smiled, he had not spoken. And yet every camera in the room was fixed on him. He had never needed to raise his voice. He had only needed the truth to be seen, unfiltered, uncut, unedited. And now it was. Outside the courthouse, the wind shifted. Not loud, not urgent, but steady, like something too long ignored finally asking to be felt. The crowd had grown in the last hour, not from spectacle, but from something heavier. They weren't just there to witness. They were there because they had seen themselves in what had unfolded. The clip had already gone viral before Garrison was even fully out of the courtroom. Now it was everywhere, on phone screens in waiting rooms, on televisions inside diners, on live streams shared across time zones. The moment Malcolm Drexler looked the judge in the eye and simply nodded was now being replayed with captions. One in bold white letters read, "I didn't come to prove I was innocent. I came to see if your court was." It didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to the people. People weren't just quoting it. They were posting it beside stories of their own. A woman in Mississippi who had filed 4 complaints against a deputy and never heard back. A man in Detroit who had stopped going to court because it felt like walking into a place already decided against him. Parents, teachers, veterans, widows. One account posted the video with just 5 words underneath, "We've waited long enough. Speak." The courthouse steps filled with reporters. But this time the cameras weren't just pointed at the officials. They were turned toward the crowd, toward the ordinary people who were no longer willing to be silent. Isaac Holloway stood quietly near the front. When asked to speak, he kept it brief. "What you witnessed today wasn't just misconduct," he said. "It was a system tested and found wanting." He did not elaborate, and he didn't have to. Behind him, a woman stepped forward, holding a photo of herself. From years ago, bruises visible along her jaw. "My name is Camille Rhodes," she said. "I filed a complaint. They told me there wasn't enough evidence, that I was confused, that maybe I had imagined more than what happened. But watching today, I know now I wasn't alone, and I wasn't wrong." Her voice didn't rise, but it shook something loose in the air. Next came Marcus Jennings, walking with his service medals pinned to his jacket. "I sat on my own porch and got told I was resisting. They cuffed me in front of my grandkids. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Then that man walked into that courtroom and didn't yell. And somehow we all heard him anyway." Not far from the press line, Odessa leaned into a small microphone held out by a local news anchor. What did it mean to see all this unfold? She tilted her head slightly and said without hesitation, "Sometimes silence does more than shouting ever could." A beat passed. No one needed to add to that. Near the edge of the lawn, a young boy who had sat in the gallery earlier that day stood beside his grandmother. A journalist crouched to his height and asked gently, "What do you remember the most?" The boy didn't look away. He looked into the lens. "He didn't shout," he said, "but I still heard him." And across the country, someone pressed share. By evening, news outlets from coast to coast had picked up the story. Analysts debated the fallout. Commentators tried to frame the event. But the public already had. Across multiple states, civil rights groups began filing motions to reopen old misconduct cases. One mayor in New Jersey announced a full audit of police complaint logs dating back 10 years. In Colorado, a judge publicly recused himself from multiple pending trials after video comparisons raised flags about prior bias. It had taken one man's silence to shake loose what generations of shouting could not. Inside the courthouse, the reckoning did not stop at the doors. Judge Claremont had not returned to the bench since her chambers were cleared. An official statement had been released by the Ethics Board. She was now under formal review for past dismissals of civil rights claims, with multiple decisions flagged for re-examination. Thomas Garrison had already been flown to an out-of-state holding facility, his internal disciplinary records made public that afternoon. The headlines no longer referred to him as officer. They called him by his full name, followed by a list of pending federal charges and a footnote that read, "Previously shielded by judicial discretion." Lorna Creed, the prosecutor, who once stood with such certainty, submitted her resignation quietly. But the silence around her was different, not dignified, just absent. None of them had been named villains, but now none of them were invisible. As the sun softened over the steps of the courthouse, people didn't leave. They stood, quietly, together. Not out of anger or vengeance, but because they knew something had shifted. Not just here, not just for one man, but for how a system saw itself when finally forced to look back. Malcolm stood near the edge of it all, away from the microphones. He had no statement prepared, no soundbite to offer. But people still turned to look at him. Because even in stillness, he had spoken the loudest. He didn't wait for a cue. He didn't ask for clearance. When Malcolm Drexler stepped through the heavy courthouse doors, he didn't pause to scan the crowd or look for a camera. He simply walked. No speech, no escort, no statement, just the sound of polished shoes brushing stone one step after another as the world around him held its breath. The reporters didn't shout his name. The microphones didn't chase him. The moment had already passed, and yet somehow it was still happening. People turned slowly at first, as if realizing all at once that the man who had stayed seated through outrage and accusation and revelation was now on his feet, not to flee, but to finish something no verdict could have completed. He didn't wave, he didn't nod, he didn't acknowledge anyone, and still every eye followed him. Somewhere near the front, a journalist reached instinctively for her mic, then stopped herself. Her hand lowered, so did her voice. No one blocked his path. No one tried to stop him for a quote. They moved instead. Quietly, respectfully. They made room not out of fear or protocol, but because something in their bones told them this moment required more than questions. It required witnessing. He walked through this parted crowd the way a tide recedes after breaking open rock. And all around him, people stepped back not to create distance, but to create space. The kind of space reserved for those who have earned the right to pass through unchanged. An older man standing with his hand on the shoulder of his grandson leaned in and whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. That's what real power looks like. The boy didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. Behind Malcolm, the courthouse doors remained open. A moment later, another figure stepped out. Her robe gone now, her expression careful but exposed. Judge Claremont descended the same steps with far less attention. The cameras didn't swing toward her. The crowd didn't part. She moved along the edge unnoticed by most, unacknowledged by all. No one stopped her, but no one watched her leave. She crossed a world she had once presided over and now could barely navigate. Further down the steps, Malcolm paused for the first time. He looked out, not back. His face didn't show triumph. It showed something quieter, something earned. He continued walking. At the far end of the street, a long black car waited. It wasn't surrounded by security. There were no tinted windows or men in suits, just a door open waiting. But he didn't hurry, and he didn't climb in. He stood for a moment longer, as if letting the weight of the day settle not on his shoulders but behind him where it belonged. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. And when he finally did step inside, the door closed without sound. The car pulled away without fanfare. But the silence left behind filled the street like thunder that never needed to crash. People didn't speak. They turned to one another slowly, some with tears in their eyes, some with something sharper, conviction, because it had not been his words that changed them. It had been the way he chose when not to use them. Later that evening, clips of his exit played beside those of his entrance. The difference wasn't in the man, it was in the world he left behind. In homes and schools and offices across the country, people remembered not the confrontation but the composure. They remembered that justice didn't arrive like a roar. It arrived like a presence. And it stayed. He didn't walk in to make them fear him. He walked in to show them what fear had made of them. And he left not with a speech, but with silence that said everything. If this story moved you, take a moment to sit with it, because sometimes the quietest moments leave the loudest echoes. This wasn't just a story about injustice. It was about dignity in the face of judgment, strength without spectacle, and the kind of power that doesn't demand attention, but commands it simply by being true. If you believe stories like this matter, stories that remind us who we are and what we stand for, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max, Our Story. It's not just a channel, it's a place where silence speaks, where truth holds, and where every voice, no matter how quiet, matters. Your support helps us keep telling stories that don't just entertain, but stay with you. Because at Mr. Max, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. She walked into the most corrupt courtroom in the state, armed with a broken camera, no backup, and a truth no one wanted to hear. They shut her down, mocked her, dismissed her, until they learned who her father was. What happens when the daughter of the FBI director brings the truth to a town built on silence? If you've ever been told to sit down and stay quiet when you knew something was wrong, you'll understand her fight. Tell us in the comments, have you ever stood up for the truth even when no one believed you? Now, let me take you to Granite Hollow. Granite Hollow looked like it had been pulled straight from a postcard. White picket fences, maple-lined streets, and a chapel steeple rising modestly above tidy rooftops. But anyone who'd stayed long enough knew the truth. The beauty was only surface deep. The town didn't breathe. It waited. Front doors stayed shut even on warm days. Curtains hung still even when the breeze whispered through the trees. And if you looked closely enough, you'd notice a patrol car parked a little too long at the corner engine, off watching but never approaching. Maya Thompson stepped off the bus with one hand gripping her worn canvas bag and the other steadying an old camera pressed against her hip. Her boots hit the pavement with quiet intent. Behind her, the bus hissed, exhaled dust, and left. No one came to greet her. The only other movement was the swinging sign of a closed hardware store and the faint hum of streetlights waking up before sunset. She scanned the town square. Nothing about it looked dangerous, but something felt off. Too quiet, too careful. Like a place that had learned to keep secrets not by accident, but by design. No one here knew she was the daughter of the FBI director, and she planned to keep it that way. It wasn't shame that kept her quiet. It was purpose. Her last name could open doors, but it could also shut others forever. And in a place like Granite Hollow, being noticed might be the worst thing that could happen. I don't need anyone to protect me, she reminded herself. As long as I don't run. She walked toward the only motel in sight, a flat-roofed, two-story place with a flickering neon vacancy sign, and the kind of welcome that felt more like a warning. Behind the front desk sat an older woman with silver hair pulled back tight and eyes that didn't bother pretending to be warm. The woman handed Maya a brass key without asking for ID. "Room 3. Don't bother the others," she said flatly. Maya nodded and climbed the narrow stairs. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. Her room had a single bed, a small wooden desk, and a mirror with a crack like a lightning bolt branching through the corner. The overhead light blinked twice before staying on. She dropped her bag on the floor, sat on the bed, and took a breath. Not of relief, just air. Just to remember she could. Then she opened her notebook. The cover was frayed at the edges. Inside were names, rough sketches, clippings, and one question circled in black ink. Jaden Brown, still in town. That name. He was the last known witness to a boy's disappearance, an incident erased from news archives, scrubbed from police logs, and blurred in memory. Maya had read the fragments, a story stitched together with silence. But silence never lasts forever. She leaned back and looked at the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead. She'd seen fear before in war zones and border towns and police precincts where truth was more dangerous than a gun. But this town didn't scream. It didn't fight. It hid. From the corner of her eye, she noticed something on the windowsill. A small toy car, red-chipped paint left behind maybe by a child who once stayed in the room, or by someone who wasn't supposed to be there. She touched it gently, a harmless object. But her instincts stirred. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Outside, dusk crept in. The street lights blinked to life one by one. Somewhere a dog barked once. Then silence returned. Maya didn't close the curtains. She wanted the room to feel open like a dare. Let them watch if they were watching. She had come for the story. But part of her knew this was bigger than just facts. This was about the things no one was allowed to say out loud. The mothers who never got answers. The boys who vanished without a headline. The towns that looked picture perfect until you started asking questions. She picked up her camera, checked the battery, still full, then flipped open her phone, no signal. She wasn't surprised. Granite Hollow didn't breathe at night, but that didn't mean it was sleeping. The sun hadn't fully risen when Maya made her way down Sycamore Street. The air was cool and damp, and the town still held its breath the way it had the night before. She walked past shuttered shops and empty porches until she reached the small house with peeling white paint and a porch swing that hadn't moved in years. A rusted mailbox read Carter. She knocked gently. The door opened halfway. A narrow face peeked out, worn, wary, with eyes that had learned not to hope. "You're the one who called?" the woman asked. Maya nodded. "I'm Maya Thompson. I'm just here to listen." The door creaked wider. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. The living room was neat, too neat, like it had been frozen in time. A single photo frame sat on the mantel. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, smiling with both front teeth missing. Beneath it, a small hoodie lay folded on the coffee table. Faint brown-red stains spotted the fabric-dried blood that time couldn't erase. Mrs. Louise Carter sat down slowly, her fingers never leaving the fabric. She didn't look at Maya at first, just stared at the hoodie like it still held a pulse. "They told me he ran away," she began, her voice like cracked porcelain. "Said boys his age do that sometimes. Said he'd come back." Maya stayed quiet, just listened. "But he never would have gone without his sketchbook, or that little flashlight he kept under his pillow. He was afraid of the dark, still slept with the hall light on." Her voice caught. She clutched the hoodie tighter. "They never searched. Not really. Said they looked into it. But I never saw no dogs, no flyers. Just a report closed quicker than it opened." She looked up, then her eyes hollow but burning. "They erased him like he never mattered, like he never was." The silence stretched, long and uncomfortable. But Maya didn't rush it. Some truths don't come out in full sentences. Some only come in pieces. Mrs. Carter lifted the hoodie and pressed it to her chest. "I don't need an apology," she whispered. "I just need anyone to admit he was real." Maya's throat tightened. She remembered another mother, another boy, another town. She had been 14, waiting in the back seat of her father's government-issued SUV while he entered a courthouse. Across the street, a woman had screamed at a patrol officer. "You know who took him. Why won't you say it?" Maya didn't know the full story then, only that her father came out stone-faced, said nothing, and drove them away. Later that night, she heard her parents argue in the kitchen. Her mother's voice cracked. "You can't just bury every case that hurts too much." Her father never replied. Back in the Carters' living room, Maya blinked hard. The image faded, but the ache remained. "I believe you," she said softly, "and I promise I'm not here to let this be buried." Mrs. Carter gave a dry laugh, more breath than sound. "People come and go. Reporters too. They show up, take pictures of the house, ask questions they already know the answers to. Then they leave. The paper runs a paragraph. And that's it. That's all he gets." "I'm not like them," Maya replied. "I didn't come for a story. I came to find what they tried to erase." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, a crow cawed sharply and then flew away, breaking the stillness like shattered glass. Then Mrs. Carter reached for something under the table, a crumpled envelope sealed with clear tape. "I don't know if it means anything," she said. "They left this in my mailbox 3 days after I called the police. No return address." Inside was a printed photo, grainy, from far away, but clear enough. 2 boys, standing beside a pickup truck. One of them looked straight at the camera. The other, the one with the hoodie, had blood on the sleeve. Maya stared, her breath caught. "I've never shown this to anyone," Mrs. Carter said. "I was afraid they'd come for me next." Maya carefully placed the photo into her notebook. "They won't come for you," she said quietly. "They're going to wish they never came for him." When Maya returned to her motel room, something felt wrong. The key turned the same way in the lock. The light above the door flickered like always. But the air inside it wasn't the same. She stepped in slowly. The chair near the desk wasn't where she left it. The notebook she'd left half open now lay neatly shut, and the toy car that had sat on the windowsill gone. A chill slid down her spine. Nothing was stolen. Nothing obvious was broken. Whoever had been here didn't come to take. They came to warn. She reached for her phone, still no signal. She turned on her backup hotspot, nothing but static bars and a frozen screen. Even the emergency channel was dead. She walked to the desk and brushed her fingers across the surface. A clean streak broke through the dust, like someone had rested their hand there just long enough to make sure she noticed. She opened her notebook. The photo Mrs. Carter had given her, the 2 boys by the pickup truck, had been moved. It was no longer tucked between pages. It now sat on top, exposed, waiting. Like someone wanted her to remember exactly what she was here for, and that they knew too. A sharp knock broke the silence. Her hand reached for the canister of pepper spray inside her bag. Another knock, quieter this time. She opened the door a crack. A teenage boy stood there, skin-pale hands twitching, eyes flicking behind him like he was being followed. "Are you?" "Maya Thompson," he whispered. She hesitated. "My name is Lucas," he said, voice barely audible. "I work at the courthouse, file room." Still, she said nothing. He pulled a thick envelope from under his jacket and held it out with shaking hands. "I shouldn't be here, but when I saw your name on the visitor log, I had to." She stepped aside. He slipped in without another word, glancing around like the walls might be listening. Lucas clutched the envelope like it was on fire. "They made me copy this, twice. It's a transcript, a police interview about the boy who went missing. They said he confessed to vandalism, that he ran into something while fleeing." He swallowed. "But I remember that day. I remember hearing him scream." Maya opened the envelope. Inside were court documents, official stamps, signatures, but something was off. The timestamps were changed. The names don't match the booking logs. And the language, it's not how kids talk, Lucas said quickly. They cut and pasted from another file. Maya flipped pages, her fingers tightening. "They're fabricating statements." Lucas nodded. "It's more than that. They're erasing people. It's like once someone talks, their name doesn't just disappear from the news. It disappears from everything. The files, the charges, even the death records." She looked up stunned. "And you brought this to me?" "I had to," he said. "But you should leave, like now, before it's too late." Maya stood still. "If I leave now, this story ends here." Lucas looked at her, panic rising behind his voice. "You don't understand. They don't just silence people. They erase the whole trail. Talking to you could put a target on my back." He opened the door halfway, then paused. "They made this town believe the danger comes from outsiders. But it doesn't. It's inside. It's always been." Before she could respond, he slipped out and disappeared into the dark. Maya locked the door behind him and sat down slowly, spreading the pages across the desk. The photo stared back at her, the boys near the pickup. One looked straight at the camera. The other wore the hoodie with the blood-stained sleeve. They weren't just two kids anymore. They were a timeline, a truth, a beginning. And now she had proof. For the first time since she arrived, the weight of what she was uncovering settled fully on her chest. This wasn't just a corrupt officer. This was something woven into the walls of Granite Hollow. A system built not just to hide a crime, but to erase the very people who dared speak it. She walked to the mirror near the bed, and for a split second she saw it, not her reflection, but something else. Movement, faint, like a breath behind the glass. She blinked. It was gone, but the feeling remained. She wasn't just being watched. She was being studied, measured. She turned back to her notebook and circled one name, Jaden Brown. He was the last one who hadn't vanished, and she was going to find him. It took Maya 2 hours to find him. Jaden Brown didn't answer his phone, didn't check his messages, and hadn't been seen at work in 3 days. She finally tracked him to a run-down repair garage on the edge of town, a place swallowed by rust oil and silence. When she pushed the door open, the air smelled of gasoline and metal. A radio played low static in the corner. Jaden was under a car, but he knew she was there. He slid out slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, not bothering to look up. "I told them I had nothing left to say," he muttered, "and I meant it." Maya didn't respond. He stood up, taller than she expected, shoulders tense like a man carrying more than he could bear. His eyes met hers, hard-worn and tired of being misunderstood. "You're from the press, right?" he said. "They said someone was sniffing around." Maya held her notebook loosely at her side. "I'm here because I want to listen," she said softly. He let out a dry laugh, not cruel, just tired. "Yeah, that's what they all say. But when it got too messy, too quiet, they left, brought their cameras, their pens, their promises, and then vanished." He turned away, grabbing a wrench, tightening a bolt that didn't need tightening. "Journalists," he said, voice low, "they run too, just like the cops, just like everyone else." Maya didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just opened her notebook, turned to a blank page, and waited. Jaden glanced at her, saw the silence, saw the stillness. Then something in him cracked. "I had a friend," he said quietly. "Elijah." His voice softened on the name. He was the loud one, the stupid one, the brave one. He dropped the wrench, let it clatter. "That night we weren't doing anything wrong. We were just walking home. A white pickup pulled up, no plates. 3 guys jumped out in plain clothes. One flashed a badge, but it looked fake. The others had zip ties. No words, no warning." Jaden rubbed his wrist absent-mindedly, as if remembering the grip of plastic biting into skin. "They grabbed Elijah first, slammed him into the truck. I pulled out my phone and started recording, didn't even think, just instinct." His voice trembled slightly. "One of them saw me, came at me hard. I dropped the phone, ran like hell. I made it home. Elijah didn't." Maya's pen paused. "They came the next day," he continued. "Took my phone, said it was evidence in a vandalism case. Vandalism. Said I was lucky they didn't charge me." She swallowed. "But," he added, "I backed it up. Not the whole thing, the file's mostly corrupted, but there's still a clip. Just a few seconds. 15 maybe." He walked to a desk drawer in the back, pulled out an old USB drive, and handed it to her like it weighed 100 pounds. "I haven't watched it in years," he said. "Didn't want to relive it, didn't want to hope." Maya plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen flickered. A grainy video loaded. It was dark, shaky, tilted sideways. The audio was distorted. But there it was. Elijah, face down, arms bound, being shoved into the back of a white pickup. One of the men looked straight at the camera, his face blurry but the voice clear. "Don't film, or you're next." Maya's hand trembled on the keyboard. Her breath caught. It was only 15 seconds. But it was real, undeniable. The first thing they couldn't erase, couldn't rewrite, couldn't fake. Jaden stood behind her, arms crossed. "I never showed that to anyone, not even his mom. I was scared, still am." Maya closed the laptop gently, looked at him. "You did what you could, and you kept it safe. That matters." He scoffed. "Not to them." "It does now," she said. "You're not alone anymore." Jaden met her eyes again. The anger hadn't vanished, but beneath it something else stirred. Grief, guilt, and maybe, just maybe, relief. "They always said we were making it up," he said. "That he just ran off, that I lied." Maya shook her head. "You didn't lie." She carefully placed the USB into her notebook like a piece of glass that could shatter. "This changes everything. Outside, the wind picked up. The garage door rattled softly. Neither of them flinched. Jaden turned back toward the car, voice quieter now. If you're really going to do this, he said, don't just tell the story. She waited. Make them feel it. The courtroom in Granite Hollow wasn't grand. No marble columns, no flags gently waving. Just plain wooden benches, beige walls, and the faint buzz of old ceiling lights. But power didn't need decoration. Here it wore uniforms and sat behind nameplates. And today it smiled with confidence. Maya arrived early. She'd submitted everything, the 15-second clip, her notes, Jaden's sworn statement. She'd stayed up all night drafting it, reviewing it, folding every truth into the proper legal boxes. She knew it wasn't perfect, but it was real. As the hearing began, the courtroom was only half full but not empty. Officers lined the side benches. Court clerks shifted quietly. And Chief Rourke sat at the back legs, crossed eyes, calm. He wasn't the one on trial, not yet, but he didn't need to be. The defendants today were 3 officers accused of mishandling a minor. Maya had tied their names to the grainy footage to the transcript Lucas gave her. She thought it would be enough to open the door. It wasn't. The judge, a man with tired eyes, in a tie too bright for the room, flipped through the documents without looking at her. When the USB was played, the room shifted. Chairs creaked. Some eyes narrowed. It was short, shaky. The audio hissed, but it was real. Elijah's body, the shove, the blurred badge, the threat, don't film or you're next. Then silence. Maya held her breath, waiting, praying that truth would be louder than the doubt. But the judge leaned back, hands steepled. Miss Thompson, he said, the court has reviewed your submission. While emotionally compelling, the origin of this footage is unclear. No metadata, no chain of custody. And your witness, Mr. Brown, has prior citations, one for resisting arrest. Maya stood. Your Honor, the footage corroborates a specific pattern of misconduct. The timestamp matches the night in question, and he raised a hand. This is a court of law, not of sentiment. The source is not credible. Motion to admit denied. The gavel hit wood, a sound louder than it had any right to be. A pause. Then came the laughter, soft at first, a murmur of amusement, but loud enough for her to hear it echo from the front benches. One of the officers, the one with the slicked back hair and a grin that never reached his eyes, stood slowly and leaned toward her as he passed. Go home, little girl, he whispered, before you get hurt. Maya didn't flinch, didn't look at him, didn't blink. She gathered her notebook, slipped the USB back into its case. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She walked past the rows of uniforms, past the smirks, past Rourke, who didn't smile but didn't need to. His eyes said it all. You've already lost. Outside, the sky was gray, windless. The courthouse steps felt harder today, not because of defeat, but because of restraint. Maya sat on the 3rd step, just for a moment. She didn't cry. There were no tears, no broken voice, only silence. Not from weakness, from calculation, because she knew now this wasn't about evidence. It was about control. They could twist timelines, discredit witnesses, reject truth. As long as they wrote the rules, the truth would always be insufficient. But truth has one advantage. It waits, and it returns. Maya opened her notebook again, not to cross anything out, but to underline something. Jaden's name, Elijah's name, and now the judge's. The system had just shown its hand, and she had taken notes. She stood, brushed the dust off her coat, and walked toward the motel. This wasn't failure, this was foreplay. Her time was coming, and next time they wouldn't see it coming. The motel room was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that seeps into your skin. The kind that makes every tick of the wall clock sound like a gunshot. Maya sat at the desk, the laptop screen casting a pale glow across her face. The USB drive she'd used in court was still plugged in. On screen, a message blinked in soft red letters. File access expires at 11:59 p.m. tonight. She checked the clock, 10:42 p.m., 77 minutes left. She'd already backed it up twice. But that warning, it wasn't about storage. It was about opportunity, leverage, timing, and control. She leaned back in the chair. The air was still. The lamp buzzed faintly. Her hand reached for her phone. She opened her contacts, scrolled until one name appeared. Dad, just that. No last name, no title, just 3 letters that weighed more than anything else in her life. Her thumb hovered over the call button, paused. She hadn't spoken to him in over a year. Not because they fought, not exactly, but because silence had settled between them like dust on an unused book, and neither of them had ever brushed it off. She remembered the last time he hugged her. She was 13. She had just won a middle school writing award. He was late. He had flown in from D.C., still in uniform, still on the phone when he arrived. But when she stepped off the stage, he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. He wrapped both arms around her tight and brief. And then he said the words she hadn't forgotten, proud of you. But be careful with the truth. It doesn't always protect you. At the time, she didn't understand. Now she did. She didn't press call. Instead, she closed her eyes. Let the silence stretch. Until 3 knocks, sharp, controlled. She opened her eyes. Not the cleaning staff. Not motel security. She knew those knocks. She walked to the door, peered through the peephole. A man stood there in a dark overcoat. Clean-shaven, hands behind his back. No badge visible, but he didn't need one. She recognized the stance, the stillness. She opened the door. He nodded once, no smile. Miss Thompson, he said. He can't be here, you know that. Maya didn't answer, sure, just stepped aside. He walked and placed a small black case on the table and opened it. Inside, another USB, sleek, sealed, and marked with a single sticker. Eyes only. He said you'd know when to use this, the agent said. He said, you'd understand what it means now. She stared at it, didn't reach for it yet. He read the transcript the man added, and he saw the ruling. Maya felt something rise in her throat. Not pride, not sorrow, just heat. Quiet, heavy heat that settled behind her ribs. The agent hesitated. He also said, he's sorry. She finally looked up. Not at the agent. At the memory standing somewhere behind him, the man in uniform. The man who taught her silence could be armor. Tell him I don't need sorry, she said. I just need him not to look away this time. The agent nodded once, closed the case gently. As he turned to leave, he paused. Be careful, Miss Thompson. Always, she replied. When the door closed, she was alone again, but the room felt different. She sat back down, plugged in the new drive, and waited. No blinking error, no red text, just a folder granite hollow, internal. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she looked at the old drive, still ticking down. 11:03 p.m. She unplugged it, slipped it into her pocket. Some truths expired, others were just beginning. She exhaled, deep, even. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel outmatched, not because she had power now, but because she knew who had been watching. And finally, someone was watching with her. The next morning, the courthouse felt colder. Not in temperature, but in tension, the kind that slides under your skin before you even step inside. Maya walked in without fanfare. No press, no entourage, just her coat, her notebook, and a small black USB drive tucked in the lining of her bag. She took a seat near the back. Same courtroom, same judge, same quiet hum of institutional power pretending to be neutral. No one looked at her, and that suited her just fine. Today's hearing was short, barely 30 minutes on the docket. The prosecution was expected to drop the case. Too many holes, they'd claimed. Too little admissible evidence, too much noise. Chief Rourke was there again, seated just behind the row of defense counsel. Calm, composed. A slight smile pulling at the edge of his mouth, like someone who knew the ending already. The judge shuffled papers. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Your Honor, based on review and current standing of the evidentiary record, the state is prepared to withdraw the motion to proceed. A quiet murmur rippled through the benches. A few heads nodded. One officer leaned back, arms crossed, satisfied. The judge nodded. Motion acknowledged. The case is... Maya stood up, not abruptly, not in protest, just deliberately. The movement alone was enough to pause the room. She stepped forward, calm and composed, walking past the attorneys, past the officers, stopping just inside the bar. She held up the USB, black, unmarked. Your Honor, she said. Her voice carried not loud but unmistakably firm. I have new evidence, verified, authenticated from internal federal archives. The judge hesitated. Miss Thompson, this court has already ruled. I know what you ruled, she said gently. But that ruling was made before the truth had a voice. She turned toward the courtroom, meeting no one's eyes and everyone's at once. Yesterday I was just a reporter. Today I still am. She let that sit for half a breath. But now you all know something else. She held the USB slightly higher. I'm Maya Thompson, and I'm the daughter of the director of the FBI. The words landed like thunder in a room where no storm had been forecast. Silence swept over the room, sharp, clean, unnatural. Chief Rourke, who had been leaning back, casually straightened. His fingers twitched once, then stilled. His smile faded. Maya didn't turn to look at him. She looked only at the judge. This drive contains audio logs, redacted transcripts, and an internal memo. acknowledging suppression of material evidence by officers present in this courtroom. She walked forward, placed the USB on the clerk's table without flourish. You may not have trusted my voice, that's fine, but this isn't my voice anymore. It's theirs. She stepped back, not defiantly, but like someone who knew exactly what they'd just done. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrower now. You're saying this was provided by your father's office? I'm saying it came from the people whose job is to know what the truth sounds like, even when it's buried under fierce silence and protocol. The prosecutor fumbled with a notepad, whispering to his assistant. Maya said nothing else. She returned to her seat, slow, steady, and folded her hands in her lap. No triumphant grin, no victorious glance. Only breath, only stillness. For the first time, people looked at her. Not as the girl scribbling in the back row, but as someone they hadn't calculated for. Someone they had underestimated. Chief Rourke wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Small, subtle, but not unnoticed. The judge didn't gavel, didn't adjourn. He simply sat there, silent, suspended as if the floor beneath him had shifted a few inches without warning. And in that moment, Maya knew this wasn't the end, but it was the turn. She didn't need applause. She didn't need validation. She had cracked the seal, and now they'd have to listen. There's a silence in a courtroom that's different from any other kind. It's not quiet, it's charged. Like everyone's breath is waiting for permission to exhale. That's what it felt like when the clerk slid the USB into the courtroom system. The screen flickered once, then again. The judge gave a curt nod. Proceed with playback. Maya didn't blink. The audio file loaded without visuals, just a black screen with a red waveform that pulsed like a heartbeat. Then came the voice. Grainy, unfiltered, but unmistakable. You want to keep your job? Then keep your mouth shut. That kid's name disappeared for a reason. I told you he's gone from the list. That's it. There was no context needed, no misunderstanding possible. It was Rourke, not shouting, not drunk, just calm, cold, final. A few heads turned toward him. He didn't move. Then came another line, clipped sharp, deadly. You want peace in this town, then bury what you saw. Gasps, real ones, rippled through the room like a wave snapping from one row to the next. The screen faded to black. The audio ended. Maya didn't smile. She didn't need to. The sound of systems cracking was louder than applause. Before anyone could speak, the courtroom doors creaked open. Boots hit the floor, steady and deliberate. Jaden Brown stepped in. Not alone, two federal agents flanked him. One walked slightly ahead, one behind. Jaden didn't look like someone broken anymore. He looked like someone who had survived. He walked to the witness stand and raised his right hand. I swear to tell the truth, he said, voice clear and even if it scares the people in this room. Maya watched from her seat, hands folded. Everything she had fought for, every risk, every moment of silence, every swallowed fear, had led to this. Jaden leaned toward the mic. I saw them take Elijah. I recorded it. They stole the phone, doctored the transcript, told me to forget. When I didn't, I disappeared from every file in town. He turned his gaze toward the judge. But she found me, he said, and she didn't run. Rourke finally snapped. He stood, slammed a hand on the defense table. This is a setup, a stunt. That file could be doctored. That kid's been coached. The judge banged the gavel once. Sit down, Chief. But Rourke didn't. His voice rose sharp and shaking. She's just a reporter. Who is she to walk in here and twist this town into a circus? His face was red now. Sweat bloomed at his collar. She's nobody. The judge tried again. Chief Rourke, you are dangerously close to... I ran this town, he roared. I kept it quiet. I kept it safe. That's when Maya stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She just looked at him, steady still, and said, I'm the one you overlooked. The girl with the notebook you dismissed. The daughter of the man you feared in Washington, but couldn't see in me. She took a breath. Calm, clean. I'm the one you underestimated. The room was frozen. Rourke opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The judge motioned to the bailiffs. Chief Vincent Rourke, he said, voice flat but final. You are to be detained pending formal review of this evidence and immediate suspension of your duties. Rourke tried to protest, but his voice cracked. The agents moved forward, and for the first time, Rourke looked small. Jaden watched in silence. His fists weren't clenched, just closed gently at his sides. Maya sat down, exhaled. She didn't feel victorious, not yet. This wasn't the end. But it was the sound they could never unhear. And the moment their machine finally broke, the courtroom didn't erupt. It shifted. As the judge ordered the arrests, the silence felt thick, weighted like gravity itself had deepened. Chief Vincent Rourke didn't resist. Neither did the three officers who stood behind him. But the way they moved, stiff, disbelieving, almost mechanical, it was the first time they understood This wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't whispers in back alleys or unproven tapes. It was real, and it had a name, Maya Thompson. The bailiffs stepped forward and removed their badges. No shouting, no handcuffs in front of cameras, just quiet surrender. A few courtroom spectators, once tight-lipped, suspicious, stood up. Slowly. Then someone clapped. Not loud, not showy, just two hands. Steady, honest. It spread, not like celebration, like relief. Because in towns like Granite Hollow, truth doesn't arrive with sirens. It walks in alone, takes the blows, and sometimes if it stands long enough, it's heard. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. Maya stepped onto the courthouse steps. And this time they looked at her, all of them, not as a stranger, not as a girl scribbling in a notebook, but as the one who didn't back down. Phones flashed. People leaned in, but Maya didn't speak. She didn't have to. Across the small plaza, Mrs. Louise Carter waited, both hands clutching her purse like it held her whole life inside. When she saw Maya, she stepped forward. Her face cracked not from sadness, but from something older, heavier release. She wrapped both arms around Maya, pulled her close. And through tears she whispered, "I don't need my boy to come back. I just needed someone to say his name like it mattered." Maya's arms tightened. No cameras caught that part. No reporters interrupted. It was just two women, one who had lost everything, and one who chose not to look away. Maya whispered back, "He mattered. He still does." Mrs. Carter nodded once. "Then that's enough." The crowd grew around them. Some clapped again. A few cried. But no one asked Maya for a speech. They watched her not like a hero, but like someone who reminded them of something they'd forgotten. That silence is not safety, and memory is a kind of justice too. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She stepped aside, pulled it out, and looked. One new message. No name, just a number. She opened it. "You stood taller than I ever did. I'm proud, Dad." Her eyes didn't water. They didn't need to. The tears had already been cried. By mothers, by sons, by voices erased too soon. Maya looked up. The courthouse behind her still stood solid gray, unmoved. But inside, something had shifted. Something had cracked. And she'd been the one to do it. She turned to go. Not fast, just forward. And as she walked, people parted for her. Not out of fear, but out of respect. They made space, because even in a place that once erased names, they remembered hers. The motel room was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel like a threat. Just stillness, earned stillness. Maya sat at the desk, the same one where she had once found her notebook, moved her photo. Exposed, her silence invaded. Now that same space held only her laptop, a fresh cup of coffee, and a blinking cursor waiting to be filled with truth. She exhaled, slowly rolled her shoulders back, and began to type. Justice never arrives with a drum beat. It comes in whispers if you're quiet enough to hear them. She paused, read it aloud in her head, let it breathe. Yes, that was it. Outside the window, Granite Hollow looked almost normal. But she knew better. Change doesn't knock doors down. It seeps through cracks. It waits. She continued writing, not just about Rourke or Jaden or Mrs. Carter, but about the space between silence and action. About the people who keep speaking even when no one listens. Each word landed with more weight than the last. Not dramatic, just honest. When she finished the first draft, she leaned back, let her fingers rest. And in the quiet, she smiled, just a little. Then the phone rang. Not the cell, the motel landline. She turned slowly. No one had that number. Not even the outlet she was freelancing for. She stared at it for a beat, then picked up. "Hello?" Silence. Just for a second too long. Then, a woman's voice, cool, measured, not local. "Nice piece you're writing." Maya didn't speak. "You did well today. Made some noise, got some attention." Still, Maya stayed silent, listening. But let's not confuse today's victory with a real checkmate. There was the tone now, not angry, not warning, almost amused. Rourke was just the front gate sweetheart. The real board, still intact. The real players, still watching. A soft click. The line went dead. Maya lowered the receiver gently. She didn't panic, didn't reach for her bag, didn't double lock the door. Instead, she turned back to her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then she typed, "If they're still watching, pause, then they still don't understand who I am." She hit save. The room stayed quiet, but her heart didn't race, because she knew the rules now. They wanted her afraid. They wanted her to feel like a visitor in her own voice. But she was done whispering. She was going to speak and keep speaking until the whole machine heard her. And if they were still playing their game, she had just made her first move. Some stories don't need sirens or headlines. Sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to look away. Maya didn't come to Granite Hollow to be a hero. She came to do what was right in a world that had grown too used to silence. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who's ever felt invisible or unheard. And if you believe the truth, no matter how long it's buried, still deserves a voice, tap like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories that speak up when others stay quiet. Because justice doesn't always arrive with a drumbeat. Sometimes it comes in a whisper from those brave enough not to stay silent.